past 10 years, cloud is one technology that has time and again proven that it can deliver to that promise, and last year it definitely has proven its worth. So in this panel, we are going to meet 4 leaders who have successfully implemented on the strategy of cloud and created infrastructure that has been successfully been able to help their organizations. So Glenn is already with us. We already heard him. Along with that, I'd like to call upon our panelists, Catherine Jespin, Head of Cloud and Infrastructure Operations at Domain Group. Catherine, welcome. Steve Day, EGM, Infrastructure, Cloud and Workplace at National Australia Bank. Welcome, Steve. Sunita Boduliri, Director of Channel Enablement at Service New South Wales. Welcome, Sunita. Glenn is already online with us. Welcome back, Glenn. Let's talk about creating this digital infrastructure that we have all been talking about and discussing. And I remember first tracking it in 2008. And today we are still talking a lot about the same challenges, and a lot of organizations are still at the initial phases of the journey. But all of you have been able to successfully execute on the strategy. So I'd like to start by asking a very simple question as to, has the narrative around cloud changed? It started off as a cost-saving initiative, and has it shifted?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with my journey towards the cloud and how it has shifted towards it. Our journey, especially for the Service New South Wales, it started about a few years ago with the typical problem of scalability, agility, and also availability. Back then, about 4 years ago, when we were looking at the journey started with the specific problem statements. We had to start with a POC to see, what can we do? And then from the POC stage, we went and picked up a product which is very high transactional volume. At the same time, it has a lot of customer impact. And we tried that on our cloud, one of the public clouds, and that cloud journey was successful. That built the basis of my entire life journey for the cloud migration program, I call it. That's the starting point. Maybe I can pass on to you and the others to see how we go.
Sure. So I think it's a really interesting question, because I've seen so many IT executives fail on that cost-saving initiative because they think about it all wrong. Cloud doesn't save you a lot of money server for server replacement, and that's where a lot of people think that it will, and it just doesn't. Where it saves you a lot of money is it creates a platform of innovation that enables you to work really quickly in getting new technologies to bear, new frameworks out, new platforms out, that through just a really agile approach improve the business dramatically, and that's where the savings come through.
That is interesting, Steve. And Catherine, I think we spoke about some of these areas earlier. What has been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the cost savings have definitely diminished if you stack up the managed service providers today in terms of public cloud, private cloud offerings there. My first rodeo with cloud was actually public cloud commencing back in 2014. We're quite an early adopter in a financial services company, and we did achieve some cost out because we were paying, I think back then, $3 per gig of storage a month, and we're in the cents now, and even fractions of a cent. So we were able to drive some significant cost out, but I think that is eroded over time. And I think if that's the conversation, if you're embarking on your cloud journey for the first time around trying to get executive buy-in, then there's going to be some nasty surprises, I think. But I think absolutely, to Steve's point, you need to see it as an innovation enabler for your organization. I'm sure everyone's got a customer-centric journey there, and you need to be able to scale your company rapidly. And cloud actually enables you to do that. You're not waiting, weeks or months for provisioning of services. That's happening in microseconds now as demand for your consumers is coming online.
I'd like to come to you, Glenn, as a global chief architect for AWS. what was the biggest value proposition that you started selling to your customers, and how had that changed until you joined Affinidi?
I think all of the three other panelists touched on it in many ways, but it's not about pure TCO cost saving. It was actually around, in the early days, around availability to new tech. The very first public cloud service ever was S3, which was an object file storage system that just didn't exist. There was no precursor to it. We all dealt with files or kind of block-based storage. This was the first public available object-based store, and developers started building fundamentally different applications on top of that. And then that just expanded over time to the hundreds and hundreds of services that are here today. And I think where it's really evolved to is that people have access to skills, and it attracts the best talent in ways that if you are, to be blunt, stuck on really legacy infrastructure, operating models, governance, you're not going to attract that best talent. It's going to be really, really hard. And that problem I see is getting harder and harder as every year goes by. It's kind of, you've got to be using the right technology to attract the best talent into that organization. And that creates a flywheel of agility. And if you do that well, cost savings drop out of it. But it's not cost savings in direct comparisons. As Steve said, you can't compare it server to server. It is very much an apples and oranges comparison.
Yeah, that's interesting, because earlier in one of the roundtables we were discussing about building the business case for the cloud, and it feels like we're still stuck in the cost conversation, and especially around TCO versus comparative cost savings, rather than talking about the actual business value and scalability. So, but in your individual cases, it seems like it has been an easy journey to build a business case. Can I assume that, or did you have to work a bit for it?
I won't say it's an easy journey, because doing it one as a POC and then trialing it on a one product is different to and migrating the entire technology stack to the cloud and changing the organization culture itself in terms of a developer, in terms of a people. When you're trying to do a business case, you're pretty much creating a journey. If you once you have that business case approved, that means you are creating a journey. So to have that, you need to incorporate that into the business case. Business case, by the way, when this business case was created, I was in a different role, but I know what exactly happened. When the business case was created, the concept taken was not about the cost. The concept was around the agility and how quickly we deliver the products to the customers, and around the customer impact, and around the security and the risk side of it. That was our measuring criteria, or a success criteria for the business case. That's it's still being executed, and we're still measuring it, and we are towards the end of the completing the program. But the starting of the journey took about 3 to 4 months to get the business case going and get the right approvals required.
You mentioned the measurement. I'm interested to know, how are you measuring the success of your cloud projects?
Simple measurements for me is right now the delivery of the product. One example I can give you is, as you all know, recently we went through COVID, and our borders have to shut in. We were given 48 hours notice. All the public have been given 48 hours notice. And we had the same information, but we had to build a system, stand up the system in 48 hours, collaborate with all our partners, whether it be a New South Wales Police or New South Wales Health, and all in 48 hours. One example, one measurement criteria is whether we can build a product in 48 hours, roll it out to production. Yes, we can. That's our measurement criteria. That's one example I'm just giving. But our measurement criteria is, as you know, the business cases have the benefits and the outcomes and the measurements. Yes, measurement criteria is availability. Measurement criteria is our risk posture. Risk posture has shifted from when we started, I think it was 22%. Now, towards the end of the journey, we are on to 89%. So we are in a much better position compared to what we are when we started the journey.
Wow, that's incredible. How about you, Steve? How has your experience been in terms of measuring and talking?
Difficult, right? Because that whole business case process is tricky, right? Because, when you're trying to explain to people that don't really understand technology, such as our Chief Financial Officer, it's, and the first time I got in front of him, I felt like the lawyer in the castle, right? I'm like, it's like the vibe, it's agility. And it just took a long time to start building the really sophisticated business case that does demonstrate it. Like, you have to get what is the cost of an incident and look at our incident reduction when we move across to cloud, right? So if you take that cost into it, that adds, the cost of, as we said here a minute ago, the server sitting on the data center floor for 6 weeks being built. That's a big cost, right? And then you start adding more and more and more layers on top of that, and you eventually get to a no-brainer business case. But you just have to be really sophisticated about it.
Can you explain being sophisticated about it? I'm really keen on.
Well, you have to bring all of these other aspects into it. And again, because that's what everyone wants to do day one, is they want to do server-to-server comparisons.
Yes.
Which don't work, right? And if you do there, you might show a 5-10% improvement. But it's being able to articulate what the agility and what those accesses to new technology and the speed of innovation will bring to the business. And trying to put that down in a business case is really hard. That's why I said it. That's why, and it has to be a very sophisticated business case to be able to capture that.
All right, so I gather that there has to be a certain language that articulates what the board and the CEO understand from the point of view of business impact. And then there is, of course, the actual measurement that we need from a delivery point of view, project point of view. Catherine, I'd like to come to you and understand how, you've had various roles at different types of organizations. Has it been difficult or has it been easier in one or the other roles?
I think both have been different. In my first journey to cloud, we were the first frontiers for financial services. So it wasn't just getting our board aligned, it was actually getting the regulators aligned. So that was a little bit of a different challenge. And like I said, there was initially a cost play there, but what we had to be able to demonstrate is that we could drive cost out. However, we didn't want to give that back to the bottom line. We wanted to use that to invest in building out cloud native capabilities that would ultimately give the business the ability to actually innovate at pace. And that was something that took a lot of time, and it wasn't something that was done overnight. But I think you needed to appeal to the senses of the various parts of the business that had a say in the strategy. So if the CFO cared, about the ability to convert, OPEX into CAPEX, then that's how you had to appeal to their senses. And I think it's, technology leaning into the business, understanding what their challenges are, and then trying to relay that in the cloud strategy and the business case as well.
That's interesting. And Glenn, when we spoke, you had very interesting thoughts about all these challenges around building the business case, cost estimation. I'd like you to share your thoughts because I know they were pretty radical.
Yeah, I think as an industry, we're really bad at estimating cost of technology, and we are really inconsistent, to be blunt. Why are we doing business cases for cloud infrastructure, but we don't do business cases for the languages that we pick to develop in? We don't do business cases to operate a database, for example. It's really, really inconsistent. What are tools? What are systems? What are applications? What are services? And how we apply business cases for it. I'll give you a real example just how bad I think we are at this. If you go back to March 2020, where COVID lockdowns happened, and within 24 hours around the world, 70% of the world's population was in lockdown, businesses disrupted. There was this pattern that we observed very quickly at AWS, that those customers that had moved the most towards a true cloud-like environment were able to pivot the fastest. And those that had not were struggling. And how do you put a cost on that? How do you put a cost on the unpredictable events that you just don't know what's happening? Touch wood, nothing like this ever happens again, but the history and statistics will say, unfortunately, it is. How do you build that into a cost model? You don't. And so, at the startups that running at the moment, we don't do cost models. We don't do business cases for technology. We look at it very holistically, and then we benchmark and basically look at what are comparisons of what other people are spending and just try to be more efficient. But we don't go in saying, okay, we're going to do a cost model or a business case for just one technology piece of the puzzle. You either do it for the whole thing or you do it for nothing. Don't just pick and choose random elements.
That's probably a great insight because, Glenn, what we've heard and what we've found in our surveys is there are incredible challenges just in the journey of migration because the moment there's an assumption that cloud is a destination rather than a work in progress journey of modernizing the architecture and infrastructure of a company. And while actually migrating, people find a lot of loopholes and pitfalls along the way, which were not estimated. And I think that also adds to the cost. And I'd like to come to you, Steve, at NAB. You're probably on your second successful project. I hope it gets successful of 1,000 applications in 1,000 days. So my question is, do you already have a destination postcard of what you want to achieve? Of course, I mean, from a simplistic standpoint, it looks like, all right, 1,000 apps in 1,000 days, but has to be deeper or more sophisticated than that?
Oh, absolutely. And it really does come to what are the benefits that we're seeing. And we are starting to really reap the benefits. We have 900 applications of our 2,200 migrated so far. So we're really pushing into the number, and we're starting to be able to demonstrate the benefits. So I'm no longer in trying to explain agility and the vibe of agility. I'm more so now just referring to what's happened. And Glenn's case up there about COVID was a classic, right? We got 35,000 people home in 2 days, right? And to stand up and say the only way we could possibly have done that is through all of the work we did on cloud. Right, the fact that our call centres were now on cloud allowed us to take every call centre person and send them home and continue to answer calls at 120% of what we did the week before because of all of the concern that there was about people losing their jobs. So, when you can demonstrate that and go, look, we implemented this cloud stuff, here's a real life example. We sent everyone home, it worked. Our productivity actually increased as a result. Here is our cost model. Our incidents are down over the last 12 months. Look, we haven't had a single incident on our cloud infrastructure in over 6 months, and yet we have them every day in our data centre. When you start to put that up and you start to put it in those terms, then they get it. So it becomes much easier.
But are there no pitfalls, would you say, or
of
is
course
the journey?
Of course there are. I spent hours on a call this morning going through the pitfalls. But no, I mean, it's whenever you change anything, right, there's going to be surprises. There's going to be, a lot of work involved, and something as complex as a complete banking ecosystem, right? It's complex, it's really complex. And to pick up one application and move it, it's got tentacles to 20 other applications. So how do you deal with all that? How do you move everything across? How do you do it securely? Because we've got APRA looking at us very carefully to make sure that we do this effectively. So how do you build all of the governance and the security into the landing zones that you're moving to? How do you convince both our internal teams as well as the regulator that our actual security profile and governance profile has improved in this move? You're doing that at the same time as you're actually making the migration, at the same time that you're, working on all of the different interfaces to everything, while you're trying to build a digital bank on top of that to make sure your customers are getting better features and services. So it is complex, but if we don't do it, we'll never get to where we need to go.
And I'd like to come back to the digital bank point, but Sunita, I'd like to come to you, and you mentioned that your starting point for any cloud journey is not necessarily the end point. It's mostly with assessing risk. Has that been the case with all the projects?
Yes, most recently for last couple of years, yes, this has been even to the point if you, the recent migration which we are doing to the cloud, the last bit, I call it a legacy systems remaining in the data center. We started the journey of as a normal FinOps model and a normal operation model. We started the journey, we did the architecture, and then I put the security lens on it. The architecture completely changes when you put the security lens on it. The networking piece changes, the instance piece changes. So we have to go back to the modeling and say, hang on guys, I think we need to change our design model. Our model is from now onwards SecOps model, not DevOps model. We need to have a SecDevOps model. Start from the security lens, start from the privacy lens, and look at the architecture. And then start the design there. That's when you get your endpoint right. Otherwise, you'll fall back again and again. So this is delayed us a bit because that's the starting journey. And the journey is new in such a way. Not everyone in team will embrace their journey because it's change of their day-to-day ways of working is changed. And the journey is actually delaying us because we are learning ourselves. As we learn, we'll become experts. And then we coach others to become experts. This has delayed our journey a bit, but it is actually towards then given us a good outcomes in terms of our practices, in terms of our ways of working. Now we are pretty clear. Our ways of working, it clearly says, we are SecDevOps, we are FinOps. We always constantly look at financially operating our clouds in such a way, reducing our costs, and always looking at the privacy lens and the security lens. We host millions of customer information. For us, the priority is protecting our customers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'd like to come to Catherine. From what I've heard from Sunita and Steve, and you also work in very customer-heavy, privacy and data compliant industry, but you've also worked, in other organizations with different roles, and there might be differences in the journey, I understand, but are there commonalities in some of the pitfalls that can be preempted from experience?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it matters whether you're highly regulated or not. I think customer expectation is mandating that we actually embed security in everything that we do. So I think that's the watermark now. It's not what our regulators, behold us to in terms of industry. So I think that's the starting point. I think absolutely there are common challenges. I would say probably the biggest thing that I often feel that organisations underinvest in is the change management, I guess, for a cloud journey. Because I guess it's not just another data centre, it's a complete change to the way that your organisation actually works. And it will be from the simplest things like, implementing additional security controls, which means that your engineers can no longer log on to servers, right? That the infrastructures are mutable. That actually requires a lot of change management, and if you understate that, I think you'll have a lot of proponents to the cloud. You'll have people that sit there and say, there was nothing wrong with the way that I worked before, and so it's making sure that you're not just doing change management in terms of cloud competencies and things for the senior executives, but you've got to make sure that you're investing in the training and the changes that your engineers on the ground are actually going to face into when they operate in a completely different way.
That's a great point, because I was about to ask what is the most underrated thing when you're going through a cloud journey, and change management sounds like a very, very credible area. And Glenn, we also spoke about a few things about the future of the cloud infrastructure, and I bring that point because there are things that people have overlooked or underrated while looking at a cloud strategy or just the adoption of it, especially from what you presented before around the future of infrastructure. So my question is, what do you think is where does the future lie, and what are the companies kind of ignoring at this point in time that they should definitely start focusing on?
I think, Catherine's point around change management is still surprisingly overlooked. And I think it's easy to say, of course you should have change management. Very hard to do it well, really hard to do it well. And often a reason why I've seen it fail time and time again is because the leadership team hasn't been able to provide clarity of purpose for that change. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we going through such a massive shift in how we operate all of the technology, and often not just the technology, but the business itself? Why? It's a simple question. It's really, really hard to answer sometimes. And if you talk in a large organization, you'll often get conflicting answers as well. Different parts of the same organization will believe they're doing it for different reasons. Talk to finance. We're doing it to save money. You talk to the business. They're doing it because they think they're going to get increased revenue, for example, as they go through this. But the one thing I don't think people really are still grasping is it's actually around the people and the skills. How do you know what skills you need 2, 3, 5 years into the future, and how are you incubating those skills now, the expertise, the experience, the lessons, so that you're future protecting yourself? And I think it's critical that we do better at that. And this goes beyond just what we do as individual organizations. This is where there's got to be stronger linking between industry and the education sector itself, and actually teaching not pure tech skills of those that are coming out of tech-orientated courses, but I think there's attributes around innovation, security, privacy, certain attributes that are really important. And by the way, they don't change. The technology itself can shift. How we think about compute CPU architectures is always going to change. And it's probably going to change dramatically as quantum computing comes in over the next 3 to 5 years. But how we think about how you have ethical use of technology should be actually fairly consistent as we go through. And I'd love to see all of us just spending more time thinking about that, the consequences and the unintended consequences of technology shift. And that should be part of change management, and it should be part of this purpose, particularly as execs. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we investing in the technology we're investing in? And how does this lead to something much, much bigger with kind of long-term sustainable advantages for the organizations that we're all leading?
Great. So we've understood, we've spoken about a lot of business cases, the change management and importance of it, and the future of tech. We're almost to the time, and my just one last question to all of you is, what has been the biggest cloud myth that you saw, you experienced or you busted during your journey? I'll start with you, Sunita.
The biggest cloud myth is we all have the assumption that it can do anything.
All right.
And the other assumption we have is it's automatically managed, we don't have to do anything. Which both are in a way true. It can handle what you want, but to the point that you still have to manage it, you still need to push your controls in it, you still need to have your operating model, you still need your team. So that's the myth I think most people have. Okay, I'll migrate everything to cloud, I'll reduce my data center costs, I'll reduce my operational costs, I'll reduce my team. That's the myth, no.
Oh, great, thank you. How about you, Steve?
I think, I definitely support what Aparna says. That's something I see all the time. It's magic. It just does everything and you don't have to do any work. But on the other side, I also love the conspiracy theory of cloud. As soon as you put your stuff in cloud, then Amazon's going to have all your data and they're going to look at everything you've got.
That's my favorite part. The retention cycles and security around it,
Yeah.
For me, I think the biggest myth is that people think that the cloud is inherently less secure than a data center. I would argue, from my perspective, it's definitely more secure, it's just more transparent. You aren't aware of the issues in your data center today.
Wow, so it's just a mindset and transparency issue. How about you, Glenn? And we'll finish at yours.
You all touched on some really good myths. Hard to add to anyone, but I think the funniest myth that I've ever heard was, the cloud is not infinite, and you actually do need to think about capacity management on your side. And incredible events can occur, again, largely outside of your control, and you better have a strategy for what happens when you can't get that capacity that you thought was infinite.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a great panel.